if we really are going to ramp to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of units, we need to really learn about how to do manufacturing right and do it at scale.
What is new from Apptronik in the humanoid robot wars? Hello and welcome to TechFirst. My name is John Koetsier. We've seen it like weekly, daily innovation in humanoid robots has been insanely fast over the past few months. Robots are getting jobs, they're getting faster. Thanks to AI, they're learning quicker, sometimes without having to be explicitly programmed. I last chatted with Apptronik in late 2023. The company had just announced Apollo, its humanoid robot. Now the company is fresh off a massive funding round. Initially, it was $350 million from Google and some big VCs, but people wouldn't stop giving them money. So now, just this month, it ballooned to $403 million from more investors, including, interestingly, Mercedes. In addition, recently, Apptronik signed a massive deal with design and manufacturing giant Jabil to build, test, deploy their Apollo humanoid robots. If you've never heard of Jabil, I hadn't either. It's a $30 billion company with 140,000 employees at 100 locations globally, not small potatoes. The question is, what is Apptronik going to do with all this new cash? What is it going to do with this new relationship? And what is new with Apollo, its humanoid robot? Here to chat, we have the CEO, Jeff Cardenas. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too. A lot has changed in the couple of years that we chatted.
A lot has changed. Yeah, it feels like many ages ago.
It is startup time, right? It's kind of like cat years, right? 1 is 10 or something like that. So I know we're going to get into the funding and probably the Jabil stuff as well. The most interesting stuff, obviously, at least to me, is Apollo, the humanoid robot. You've gone through a bunch of iterations there. What's new? What can you tell me about speed, power, intelligence, capability, all that stuff?
Well, we've shown Apollo 1. We have new versions of Apollo that will launch this year and that we'll announce publicly this year. A lot's changed on Apollo, I think, overall. I think the biggest thing that we've realized is how important it is to have a stable platform that you can build on. That's really the key enabler for all progress moving ahead. I think it's just
What does
gotten
that
better
mean
overall.
exactly? What do you mean by the platform? Do you mean the power pack? Do you mean the actuators? Do you mean what do you include in platform? The intelligence?
I think the entire robot, really the hardware and the software platform overall. So a lot of times you think about the robot and you think about the AI. There's maybe a middle layer, which is, think of it like the operating system as well. So the robot that we've shown publicly so far has been Apollo 1, but that was in September of 2023. So we've been doing a lot of work internally, really, to improve it, to make it more robust, more scalable, and really focus on getting out into the world, out of the lab and out into the world in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
We'll share more about sort of the new stuff that we're working on later this year. But there's been changes all around. We've put a bigger battery on the next version. We're focusing on still swappability, so the ability to keep the robots operating 24 hours a day, running continuously, focused on robustness of the system. We've got to build a lot more Apollos. So we're building many more this year, really starting to ramp it up and getting it to scale. You name it, we've been iterating on it. We've grown the team quite a bit since I think the last time we talked, and just made improvements all the way around.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, right? I mean, because you start out and it's a technology project and it's a small team and you build stuff and it's super cool. And you realize that in order to realize your vision, you don't have to just build a machine. You have to build a machine that makes the machine. And that machine is the company, right? It's the people, it's the structure, it's the places, it's the raw materials, the sourcing of all this stuff. And that's a massive job that probably to some technologists feels a little distracting from the mission, but it's absolutely critical and central to doing it. Tease us just a little bit. I mean, I know we've seen from figure 1 and figure 2, a massive speed increase. I forget the exact multiple, but it was huge. Tease us just a little bit. How much faster is it? Is it stronger? I know you're going to save the details for the big launch and the reveal, but can you tease us just a little bit?
Well, there's so many details that go all the way into building, a humanoid robot with 30 plus degrees of freedom. And one of the things we can talk about is, I think last time we were talking about gross manipulation versus dexterous manipulation. And there's been some big advances in AI just in the last couple of years that have really enabled dexterous manipulation to become more feasible. This was always really the big application for humanoids. And I think previously we were talking about just simple things like moving boxes and totes for humanoids as a way to enter the market. But we're really focusing more on dexterous manipulation now. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the real wins across humanoid robotics overall. So the upgrades to the system is more robustness. There is more speed maybe overall, but everything's just gotten better. Everything's gotten industrialized, and we've done multiple iterations on our actuators. There's a lot of unsexy things that you learn along the way, things like cable connectors across the system and how robust you make. We've done over 60 iterations of electric actuators. I've looked at hundreds of connectors. When you have all these actuators in the system, if you have any failure point, the way I always explain robotics is you can think of robotics like a chain, and the chain is only as strong as the weakest link. So you're really trying to pay attention to any of these failure points. I think for any startup, the big risk that you run is if you scale the wrong thing, you can die, right? If you put a bunch of systems out there that are not robust, that are not stable, you can blow up the company. And so I think, there's a lot of excitement and talks about sort of the ramp on the back end of this and the opportunity, which is tremendous for humanoids, but you really got to make sure that you get that system right before you start to ramp it and scale it. And so we've been really focused on this for the last couple of years since we launched Apollo, and hopefully we'll be able to show off where, the fruit that a lot of that work has bared.
Premature scaling, hey? Wow. The urge to go quick, the urge to be first, the urge to be fast, and all that matters, right? But you do it too quick and you've got a support nightmare, or you got a PR nightmare, or you have a customer nightmare. Everybody's unhappy. Everything's breaking every 2 minutes. If you're going to market something that doesn't need breaks, quote unquote, works 24/7, quote unquote, it's got to be tough. It's got to be strong. Can't be breaking down every other day. So that makes a ton of sense. Cool. Give us some timetable. When do you think you'll be releasing the new version and details about it?
I think, what I'd say generally is just later this year. We
So
have,
bold, so
yeah.
bold.
We have new versions of the system that are online, and we're working on it internally. And so we'll
Yeah.
talk about when we're going to announce it publicly. We want to really show off what it's doing before we make any public announcements. So
Yeah.
stay tuned later this year. Yeah.
Eagerly tuned here. Excellent.
Yeah.
You have a new tagline, robots for humans. What are you talking about there?
Well, it's interesting. So, we came out of a lab at the University of Texas called the Human-Centered Robotics Lab. And when we were first, really thinking about the mission of the company and everything, Robots for Humans has been around really from the very beginning. I think that it's been more publicized lately when you start to think about, there's a lot of noise in the humanoid space, and how do we differentiate these different companies and who's doing what? What are the different points of view? Because there's a lot of them that are competing. And so we've really leaned back into our roots from the Human-Centered Robotics Lab and really started to push forward this idea of human-centered design and human-centered robotics. I think a lot of people saw that in the design of Apollo, where a lot of people say Apollo's the friendliest looking humanoid out there. But that was really part of a core philosophy where we've been thinking about, how humans are going to interact and work with and around these robots. And how do we create really an optimistic version of the future where you have these robots that are really designed to be used by humans, to be working with them, to be operating in our spaces. And so the way that I think about it is what we want to build is human helpers. And we want to build humanoid robots that humans actually want, that humans want to be around, they want to work with. And I think this is similar to the same ideas that really Apple brought to the first stages of the computer revolution, right? There was competing ideas. Yes, it was clear that computers were going to be incredibly useful, but the question is, what would that future look like? And there was some folks that were, sort of thinking of computers as these just functional machines that would serve their purpose. And Apple really brought this point of view of, no, these are going to be used by humans. These are tools to augment human productivity and capability. And that's my view for robotics. And I think that's particularly important for humanoid robots, is that they're thought of and designed to be human helpers versus something that replaces humans.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we're going to get into a lot of different stuff as we continue. We're going to talk about the fundraise and Jabil and a bunch of other stuff. We're also going to talk about Mexico, which was a big part of your vision in the past, and the tariff wars, and China, and the race to humanoids, and all that stuff. Maybe before we do that, talk a little bit about the speed of innovation that you're seeing in the space right now. Obviously, you have the best view of the speed of innovation in your own company, but you see all the announcements, you see all the things that are going on. It seems like it's massively ramping up in the last few years. Is that just my impression?
No, it is massively ramping up. I think we're on this exponential curve. Um, the way that I like to explain it is, prior to the last couple years, robotics as a whole, not just humanoid robots. So there's innovations that will impact humanoids. There's innovations that will impact just robotics as a whole. But generally, we had a ceiling in terms of what these robots were able to do. We were even using things like machine learning. We were basically, pre-programming these systems to do particular tasks. And the ceiling that we had before has now been removed. And so the excitement is everyone's racing up this new curve, and we're able to do things with robots. We're able to put them in new environments and use cases that were never previously possible. I think the simple way of explaining it is we're moving from maybe pre-programming robots and sort of modeling the world to where the robots can now learn. And
Mm-hmm.
now that you sort of introduced learning and it's become clear that learning is really going to win the day, um, the sky's the limit in terms of where this goes. And so it's accelerating very quickly. A lot of the stuff you're seeing on the AI side, when we were first talking, the papers in the academic labs were just being released.
Mm-hmm.
And so the acceleration from research and really sort of commercializing this is very fast. This is happening at a very quick pace. And so we're building on all of the existing technologies that have happened before. I think in terms of the interest, and a point that I think is sort of interesting to make is that, humanoid robots has been something that humans have been dreaming about for thousands of years. The first attempts at building humanoid robots or humanoids was in third century BC China. They were called automata.
Yeah.
And Leonardo da Vinci attempted to build a mechanical human. And so this has been in our humans are tool makers, and this has been in our consciousness for a long time. This idea, what if you could build a mechanical version of ourselves that would do all the things that we didn't want to do? Um, and so we're now at this point where it's all possible.
Mm-hmm.
Anything's possible. And the question is, like, how do you do it? Where do you focus? How does it start? How do you do it in a safe way and do it in a way that benefits humanity as a whole? How do you avoid some of the pitfalls that science fiction, has done a great job of warning us about? But yeah, it's moving insanely fast. I think it's captured the imagination of the public, and there's a lot of folks really jumping in. And it's now, I think we're going to talk about this hopefully as well, but it's now become a global race where
Mm-hmm.
there's significant amounts of money that are really pouring in because of the implications I think it will have for national competitiveness long term.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, it's interesting what you just mentioned, this shift from having to program everything super slow, super challenging, I mean, super intensive, to AI models coming in and presenting robots with tasks that they've never seen before, and they're able to understand their environment, make correct decisions. Is there any risk in that? Because you move from sort of a deterministic, programmed sort of behavior to kind of a bit more of a probabilistic, figure it out on the fly type of behavior. Are there risks in that as well?
I think there can certainly be risks. I mean, that's why it's important, who's doing it and how you're doing it. And we can talk about our partnership with Google DeepMind, but that's one of the areas that I've been really excited to partner with them on because, they have the resources and the interest to really focus on doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
So, we said robots for humans. when we met the Google DeepMind team, their tagline was AI for the benefit of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And we felt like, hey, this is a good pairing. We're really trying to push this forward in a responsible way. And I think that's going to be important in the long run. I've always viewed us as, the robot race is happening. This is an inevitable thing that humans have been thinking about for a long time, but we're on team human. This is only interesting to me such that it improves the way that we live and work in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think there's different ways to go about it. And I think we want to be mindful about how we think about it. So, you talked about Peter Diamandis, I think in the chat before, but there's a way that this unleashes human potential and creativity and creates this abundant future for all of us. But we got to make sure that we're smart about how we do that to really achieve that.
Yeah, you mentioned Google DeepMind, and I think it's a good time to talk about Google. They're an investor. I assume a significant investor. I mean, if I'm Google, Alphabet, of course, is the parent company there, I want to have a piece of this emerging space. I mean, even Meta, Facebook, has started investing in humanoid robots. I mean, like, what does the world come to, right? A social media company, a messaging company is now investing in humanoid robots. But yeah, if I'm Google, if I'm Alphabet, I'm at the size of a company that I can't ignore a space that is going to be so incredibly, incredibly massive. So talk about the investment round, who's in it that you're excited by, and what you see the potential as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I would say I don't see how there's any way that any major company won't participate in robotics, general purpose robots. It's the biggest market we're going to see in our lifetime, and I think that's been publicized probably enough lately by different CEOs and other folks. In terms of the round, it's been this has been a dream that I've had since I was a kid. I sort of grew up dreaming about the future and wanting to play a role in it. In some regards, I feel like some of us have lost our sense of wonder about the future in the world. I sort of maybe nostalgically look back at like the 1950s and this idea that we would have, flying cars and rocket packs and smell-o-vision and all the crazy things that they thought about. And that's kind of how I always saw the future. I really dreamed about it. We always knew that this was going to be a long road. So my view was this is something I was willing to spend the rest of my life working on. I thought that it was important, and I thought that we had a unique point of view that we could bring to the table. Sort of the way I think about it is a lot of people talk about the brains, but we also want to bring the heart. We want to really bring our humanity to robotics in the way that we're doing it, and I think that's going to be increasingly important. Myself and my co-founder Nick were native Texans. So I always dreamed about, what I call the new economy in Texas. So if you look at Texas, we're, traditionally, you can think of us almost like Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
We're an oil and gas economy, and that's afforded us many things. But if you look at, oil and gas, whether we're at the peak now, if you look 10, 20 years from now, it's a downhill slide. I think everything will become more and more electrified over time. And so
Not
I had
according to your
thought,
state government, apparently, but yes.
that's my, over some time period, I think people would say.
Yes.
Um, and and so one of the things I thought a lot about was we wanted to really showcase the level of innovation that was happening here. I always believed that Texas was the place to build this company. I think we talked about this before. So in terms of the round, one of the things I'm really proud of is we worked with Capital Factory, which is one of the most active local investors here. And we actually were able to leverage a lot of the legacy Texas families that really stepped up and participated. There's a guy, Chris Camillo, who's been a huge supporter of us. He worked with Capital Factory, and we really got support across the Texas region. And that was something that I was really proud of. So Google obviously participated. We could talk about Google's legacy in this space, but I don't think anybody's probably done more in robotics, more for robotics, and particularly in humanoid robots than Google. When we were first getting started, Google had actually bought every humanoid company basically in the world, including Boston Dynamics, 10 years ago. So they were even early to the humanoid game. And so, we had dreamed about working with Google from the beginning. Like if I had a choice, I always thought I would love to work with Google. I think I just agree with sort of the philosophy that they're going about things. So Capital Factory was one of the leads. That was sort of like a Texas play, if you will. That was the hometown push, and then Google. Then we also had a group, B Capital. Um, I met Howard Morgan. Howard Morgan is a legend in investing. He did Renaissance Technologies and a variety of other things. He was actually a professor before he became an investor, and always looked up to him. I'd met a lot of the folks at B Capital, and I thought, the way that they were thinking about the future and sort of these big bets long term, I thought they'd be a great partner. So our leads were Capital Factory and B Capital, and then Google was a big anchor investor in the round as well. We also had folks like Mercedes-Benz, who is another group that I really admired. It's kind of interesting how this stuff works out. I always really looked up to Apple. And one of the things that I found as I got deeper is that one of Steve Jobs' inspirations was Mercedes. He actually used Mercedes as an example for the
and
types
drove one for forever.
Yeah, that's right. He got a new one every 6 months.
With no license plate.
Yeah. He had a loophole that allowed him to not have a license plate. He'd get a new one every 6 months. But he actually used it as an example for the types of computers that he would build. People would say, look, no one's going to want these expensive computers. And he said, yeah, there's going to be commodity computers, but there's also like Mercedes, right? You can really sort of take the craft of your machine building to a higher level. And there's a place for you in the world if you do that, and people that will appreciate it. And look at what that did for Apple. And so working with Mercedes has been awesome, because just learning the level of craft and care that they put into making these cars, and the fact that they've done that over 100-year legacy is amazing. There's really interesting story about how Mercedes was founded and sort of the ethos and spirit. And it's interesting to me as I try to build our company to sort of think about how they've been able to sustain that over such a long period of time. So us had Mercedes. We've had global investors as well, groups like Korea Investment Partners. So we had a group of Korean investors that came together to support us. We had Japan Post involved, Ryder Ventures. We had a group called Assembly Ventures, who they're out of Detroit, and they've been great supporters of us from the very beginning. Alpha Partners, a whole list of folks that you can see there, not to exclude anyone in particular, but just people that I call, true believers that really have stepped in. I think overall it's still early in the humanoid space. And if you look across our investors, there's many more, but these are people that, believe in sort of the mission of Apptronik, believe in the way that we're trying to do this. And it's been really exciting to have their support, and certainly feel the responsibility to do it right and to deliver on the promise that's in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, now you have a significant war chest, and we talked about that right off the top. You need that because there's a ton to build out here. There's a ton of like people are talking about, in a number of years, and the number is not that high, having millions of robots out there, and manufacturers talking about, I plan to manufacture 100,000 a year or something like that, right? Individual ones, and to actually build the factory that enables that. That is no small endeavor. Requires a significant amount of investment, and then to build a whole infrastructure. Now, you did a deal with Jabil. Talk about that briefly. What does that bring to the table? What does that do for you?
Yeah, I mean, you can think of building a humanoid company or a company like this almost like building a car company. There's so many different things that you have to focus on. And when I was a naive grad student, sort of starting out, thinking that we would raise, $400 million is almost inconceivable as a Series A, let alone. What I've learned overall is there's just so many battles to fight and so many things you have to do. So you have to be smart about the way that you think about this. There's been this interesting analogy where I say I used to think of things as a switch or a button, like off or on. But what I've learned is that if I look at the control panel in front of me, almost everything's just a dial. And so the question is, to what degree do you do it and when? And so manufacturing is going to be extremely important, and the ability to scale and ramp. I think it's been widely publicized, how tremendous the demand is for humanoids. And so for us, we had to say, okay, like what's our core competency going to be early on, and what do we really focus on, and how do we get there? And so um, we came out of school, and I had this vision of robots building robots, and we would do all of this on the Colorado River, and we would build a supply chain up from South America and component manufacturing in Mexico, and then do a lot of this here in Austin. And we've really been working, brick by brick, sort of to make that a reality. One of the things that we realized was that if we really are going to ramp to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of units, we need to really learn about how to do manufacturing right and do it at scale. We can talk about we talked about tariffs and trade, but I was convinced by someone who'd taken multiple companies public, had gone from 0 to 17,000 units a day at a previous company, our COO. He said, look, we should work with a great manufacturer to start off with. We can ramp with them, and then we can have optionality in the back end for sort of what this looks like on the back end. But let's work with people that really know what they're doing. I think that will prove to be a smart move in the next stage of the company. And I think that's really highlighted by sort of the Mexico strategy. So if I would have done this all myself, I probably would have built a production facility in Mexico. We are doing a lot here in Austin as well. But had I done that, that would have been potentially a big challenge as we look at the, sort of looming, trade conflicts that we're having. And so working with Jabil has been really interesting because, they have 85 manufacturing facilities across the globe. We were looking at Mexico, but they also have a variety of American facilities as well. So we can move from Mexico to the US if we need to. And I can do that with an existing infrastructure and platform. If you look at, Apptronik and you compare us to someone like Tesla, a lot of the advantages that Tesla has is their manufacturing scale. And so as we sort of think about how we're going to compete, my view was I can either build that from scratch and try to go head to head, or I can work with someone who has the manufacturing scale already, and we can really learn from them and partner with them. And so it's been great to work with Jabil so far. We've already learned a ton. We're really learning how to do this right. And then that becomes a dial then that we can crank, where we can start to really ramp to tens of thousands of units, hundreds of thousands of units, much more rapidly and more capital efficiently than we could previously. I think even though 400 million looks like a lot of money, this is the very beginning. If you look at what it takes to get a car company off the ground, 400 million can go very quick if you're not smart about how you do it. And so we're still trying to be, both ambitious and about the scale and scope, but also cognizant of the stage that we're in this space. And I think Jabil is a great partner for us right now to really ramp these systems and get them out at high quality out into the world.
Super interesting. Manufacturing as a service. It's kind of like Apple, and then they've got their partners building, and that's actually global now. That's China, but that's also in the U.S. That's also in India, and it's also, frankly, in Indonesia now as well, thanks to
Yeah,
local.
I think one of the things you'll see, and we can talk about even some of the things I said in the last conversation, but we started this company coming out of grad school. We've met a lot of really smart people overall. I'm always learning. I think this makes a lot of sense right now. I do think that there's a lot of wisdom to the factory being the product. You talked about the machine building the machine. But with the resources that we have right now, I think this is a great, initial step for us to learn a lot. And then we have optionality on the back end for sort of how this evolves over time. And I'm sure, as with anything, I'll learn a lot of tough and painful lessons that will shape sort of how we think about things in the future.
It's not like you lack things to work on or lack things to think about or lack challenges in just building the platform itself. So I think that makes a ton of sense. It also does feed into, we've touched on it tangentially, but it does feed into this tariff war thing that's going on. I mean, if you can't manufacture locally, you're going to have some challenges at least in the next 3-4 years, and potentially longer than that. Who knows how long these things go on for? Who knows what happens as there's retaliatory tariffs and all this stuff. So that is interesting how that's changed kind of what you're doing. Let's talk a little bit about China. So Peter, that we talked about there before, Diamandis, he did that report and he identified 16 of the major humanoid robot manufacturers, companies that are working on the problem globally. There's many more. There's about 100. I've recently talked to some that are not on that list. But essentially, if you look at it from a geopolitical lens, there's the US and there's China. There's a lot of startups and companies working on it in the US. There's a lot of startups and companies working on it in China. There's a few in Europe. There's a few here and there elsewhere, but it's kind of US and China. How do you see that? How do you view that? Who do you see as leaders? Who do you see as people that you think, I need to watch out for them on a national scale as well as individual companies?
It's just amazing to me to hear that there's 100 companies, working on humanoid robots. I think I made this joke the last time I was on, but 100% of the people that we talked to when we were starting the company said, humanoid robots didn't make sense and that they would take 50 years and they'd never be practical. And now, this flips, and it's been interesting to be on the inside to see even, investors that I talked to 2 years ago that said, humanoids don't make sense. They didn't want to pay attention to hardware. Now they have a humanoid thesis and hardware is the name of the game. And so it's interesting how it shifts. I do think this will be a global race overall. I think that this is society transforming technology. This has the potential to shape or reshape GDP for a country. And if you look at what China's done, a lot of people think, Tim Cook talked about this, but a lot of people think of China as the low cost labor destination, and that's why they're so successful with manufacturing. But it hasn't been true for years, right? They're the high tech manufacturing destination in the world, and they've done that largely with robotics. So they have more robots deployed in China than the rest of the world combined, which is a staggering thing to think about. So I do think this will be a global race, and I think it'll be important for us to really compete and win. I think I call this the space race of our time, and I think that will be true. I do think China is really a fierce competitor when it comes to robotics. They're making significant investments. They just announced a fund of $138 billion that they're going to invest into their domestic robotics sector, which is a significant amount of money. That makes 400 million, or what some of the other humanoid companies are raising, a drop in the bucket compared to that. And that's in addition to what they've already invested. So they're really coming. I think they have the industrial base where they're building, pretty good hardware very quickly. And just culturally, there's a lot of excitement coming across there, from new entrepreneurs across the board. So it seems like there's a new humanoid company coming out of China every week. I think the U.S. has a number of advantages, though. The robot was invented in the U.S., right? So the first robot went into a General Motors factory in 1961. And we've been working on this for a long time. I think we seeded the race in the previous robot race to largely Japan was, I think, probably the biggest winner of that in the first race. But with the DARPA Robotics Challenge, when you look at humanoids, that really seeded a variety of companies, including ours, including you can really trace many of the roots of the humanoid companies out there today to the DARPA Robotics Challenge in some way, shape, or form. So that was over a decade ago. I think that the U.S. clearly has a lead in AI. We have the major AI companies, but I think as you've seen with DeepSeek and other things, China is really coming to compete in a different way than the way we're doing it here in the U.S. And I think it's anyone's race to win, but I think it's going to be really important that that we at least have a national strategy. So I was just in D.C. this week, and we can talk more about that if that's interesting. But China
It is.
China launched a national strategy in 2021. This is something that people have been trying to do in the U.S. for over a decade. There was even something called the Robot Caucus a decade ago where people were trying to develop a national strategy because this is going to be so important in the long run. And so I think we finally have the ear of Congress to make it happen right now. But yeah, I think you're going to see across the globe everyone competing. I think think of this like computers. And the way that I sort of explain it is this is just the evolution of computing, but now it's all computers entering the real world. And this is the big frontier for everyone. And so right now it's the US and China. This is the space race, but many other folks will be competing and wanting to play as well.
Absolutely. I think that if you want your country or your geopolitical grouping, let's say Europe, European community, that sort of thing, European Union, to be competitive in the long run over the next 50 to 100 years, you need to have a significant investment and you need to be able to build a credible humanoid robotics platform. Obviously, China has significant demographic pressure as well as international competitive pressure to build this, as their one child policy has resulted in a declining population. And you see that in Japan. You also see that in the States, and you see that in Europe for sure as well, right? So there's a lot of factors at stake here. Maybe we could keep talking for hours. Maybe let's bring it to a bit of a close here, and I'll ask you a little bit on Timetable. And I'm not going to ask you about your next model you're going to show and stuff like that, but what I want to ask is, when can I call you up or go on your website and order a robot, 100 robots, 1,000 robots, 100,000 robots? When can humanoids start making a meaningful dent on the workforce? Is that 2 years away? Is that 10 years away? Is it somewhere in between?
I think so. It depends on who you are to be able to order these, and I'll at least give my point of view. And I think there's different points of
I'm your
view.
very good friend who's invested $100 million in you.
All right, then you can do it tomorrow. No, we're in the pilot stage still for humanoids, and in a meaningful way. Like there's people that are talking about commercial contracts, but those are for a handful of robots. These are not significant commercial contracts yet. You'll see pre-orders that will get announced that will be significant dollars, but that's for future delivery, right? So there are robots out there, including ours and others, that are doing meaningful pilots today, but it's still the pilot stage. So what I say is 2025 is about commercial viability. So proving these robots are working in these environments, really doing useful work. I don't think you start seeing real commercialization and uptake until the back half of 2026. And I think so. I think let's say 2 years is sort of meaningful, but you'll see a lot of activity and you'll see announcements. People will be pre-ordering robots. You'll see big commercial deals because people will see enough in pilots to start to pre-order these robots. But from a volume standpoint, I don't think that happens until late 2026. And that's going to be for industrial applications early on. The big thing to overcome for broader uptake is safety. So we don't have safety standards. We start to move towards learning. There's a lot of things to figure out about how you safety certify a robot that is working on is learned. So I think that this is going to happen in 3 phases. Phase 1 is industrial, largely logistics and manufacturing. That's like 2 years out. That's before meaningful uptake. And then stage 2 will be things like hospitality, retail, and healthcare. So sort of in stage 1, you're mixing the robots with experts, people that are highly trained. In stage 2, you're starting to mix the robots with the public. You're doing relatively repeatable tasks, but you're now out in the world. And then stage 3, which I think is the big opportunity that people are excited about, is the home and elder care or assistive care maybe. And I think that's probably 5 years out, bull case, before it's meaningful. I think there's a lot to solve, and even if you're 99.99% safe, if you're around children, infants, or your 90-year-old grandmother, the stakes and the liability is really high. So even folks like Unitree, who's put a lot of systems out there, is even saying they think the home is further out. That doesn't mean you're not going to see testing in the home. I think people are training in the home. There will be early adopters that will sign all sorts of waivers, and you'll be teleoperating inside of the home. But in terms of meaningful uptake, you can go online today and you can buy humanoids. So you can buy a platform, but largely for research and development. Like these aren't like real products yet that you can buy, and it's a turnkey system that is doing work in whatever environment. These still take, teams of engineers and teams of support staff. But it's happening now, and they're out in the world doing interesting things, and there's a lot of money pouring in and a lot of excitement across the board. So that's how I think it's going to play out.
Cool. And you've been pretty focused on the manufacturing logistics space, industrial spaces. Is that still entirely your focus? Are you also starting to look at the home a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I've been dreaming about robots in the home since I was a kid. For me, the North Star, the thing that actually got me into this, and it's not something I used to talk about as much, is elder care and assistive
Mm-hmm.
care. I
Mm-hmm.
think if you look at humanoid robots in particular, I think that the opportunity for humanoids in elder care is maybe the biggest opportunity that there is. You sort of think about this as happening in two stages. We have these shifting demographics that's creating a labor shortage on the front end, but an aging population with no one to take care of them on the back end. If you look at the human experience overall, I think that the way we age, especially in the West, is the worst part of
It
that.
is. It is.
And my dream is that, for my parents, that they'll have a robot that helps take care of them so that they can age with dignity. I've told stories about my granddad. My granddads both had different stories, but the gist was they lost their dignity as they aged. They never relied on anybody for anything. And then suddenly they had to rely on people for everything. And I sort of dreamed of the idea that they would have a robot one day that would do all of these things for them. And I think that will happen. And so for us, it's a long journey. This is hopefully what I'll be working on for the rest of my life. We want to do it in a safe way. We want to help those folks not do something that could hurt them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to be smart about how we do it. But yeah, it's a big dream. I think everyone asks us, when are the robots going to do their laundry? I want that too. But we got to get there. And so I think marrying the excitement that is out there with just pragmatism about where we're at. I think we spent about a decade as a humanoid industry in the wake of the DARPA Robotics Challenge, really trying to lend credibility to what we were doing. Like, hey, this is
Mm-hmm.
real. These are
Mm-hmm.
serious people that are working on this. This technology is going to happen. We're going to be smart about the way we do it. And now, it's full blown, hype is now happening, and people are now, imagining what these robots will do. And I think it'll be important for people to just be mindful that, this is like still the early 80s of the personal computer. This is yes, they will do all of these things in the future, but we want to make sure that we do it in a smart way and just be realistic about the timetables in front of us.
Super interesting. If it's the early 80s, wow, the innovation is 10x faster because we're talking of doing it in a couple years or 4 years or 5 years, what it might have taken 20 years or even longer to do in that space. Jeff, thank you for taking this time. I know you're insanely busy. I appreciate it. Hope you have a wonderful day.
It's always great to see you, John. Thanks for having me.